I'd have to agree with Rodman. If he was black, he'd be just another good guy.
Isiah Thomas doubled down, famously calling him a basic white boy. But if you buy that narrative, you are missing the horror movie that was Larry Bird's career. Magic Johnson knew the truth. He knew Larry wasn't just a baller, he was a psychological predator who broke the league's toughest enforcers and dismantled teams left-handed, literally just to kill time. We are going to take you from the 13 tons of gravel in a driveway that secretly destroyed a legend's back, all the way to the gut-wrenching phone call in 1991 that proved Larry Bird was the only man on earth who could talk Magic Johnson off the ledge. You are about to witness exactly why grown men in the NBA had nightmares about the hick from French Lick. And it all starts with a single game that flipped the sports world upside down. You have to understand, Magic Johnson didn't just walk onto the court in the early 80s thinking it was going to be showtime and champagne every night. The man had a morning routine that borders on psychotic obsession. Before he brushed his teeth, before he grabbed a coffee, before he even thought about breakfast, Magic snatched the morning paper to hunt down one thing: Larry Bird's box score. I'm not joking. He was literally structuring his entire emotional existence around what a guy 2,000 miles away did the night before. It wasn't just curiosity, it was survival. Like a soldier frantically studying the movements of an enemy sniper he knew he couldn't hide from. But to get it, you have to rewind to 1979. This obsession didn't start under the bright lights of the NBA. It was born in the 1979 NCAA Championship. Michigan State versus Indiana State, Magic versus Bird. The duel that birthed modern basketball. You might think, just another college game. Wrong. This wasn't a game. It was a cultural earthquake. We are talking over 35 million viewers. To this day, it is the most watched college basketball game in history. That is bigger than the NBA Finals. That is bigger than most sitcom finales. The tension, suffocating. You had Bird, the introverted small-town kid from French Lick, dragging a no-name school into the national spotlight by sheer will. Then you had Magic, the smile, the swagger, the golden child of Michigan State. It was flash versus grit, city versus country, charisma versus a cold-blooded stare. It was every sports movie cliche punched into one night. And somehow, it actually delivered. Final score, Magic wins 75-64. On paper, Magic took the crown. He put up 24 points, 7 boards, 5 assists. But here's the kicker. Even while losing, Bird didn't look defeated. He didn't whine. He didn't pout. Witnesses said he looked like a supercomputer processing data, already 5 moves ahead of everyone else in the building. That look, it terrified Magic. Because Bird had been an unstoppable force of nature all season long. The guy averaged nearly 29 points and 15 rebounds. He took a team that had no business being there and dragged them to the brink of immortality. And even with the trophy in his hands, Magic admitted later that Bird was the one player who made him genuinely nervous before the tip-off. That isn't hype. That is fear. We are talking about the guy who is about to revolutionize the sport. And the first time he saw Bird up close, he realized, oh no, this dude is a problem. Fast forward a few months, and they both crash into the NBA. Now, keep in mind, the league back then, it was on life support. Ratings were in the toilet. They were airing finals games on tape delay at midnight. It was bad. The NBA was desperate for a savior. And like the basketball gods answered a prayer, they didn't just get a star, they got a rivalry that felt biblical. Magic landed in Los Angeles on a Lakers squad that was absolutely stacked with talent. I'm talking Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Norm Nixon, a roster built to win championships in their sleep. Meanwhile, Bird walks into a Celtics locker room that was a dumpster fire. They had finished with 29 wins and 53 losses the year before. They were a mess, a complete disaster. Then Larry shows up. Rookie year, averages 21 and 10. Suddenly, Boston wins 61 games. That is a 32-game turnaround. One guy, one mustache, one bad haircut, and he completely flipped the momentum of the most storied franchise in history overnight. And he didn't do it by jumping over people or breaking backboards. He did it with fundamentals, a genius IQ, and a level of arrogance that would make a fighter pilot blush. Then came the Rookie of the Year race. Magic was putting up Showtime numbers, 18 points, 7 boards, 7 assists. Incredible stats on a winning team. But Bird, he resurrected the dead. He dominated both ends of the floor and snatched the award. Magic took that personally. And right there, the rivalry shifted from competitive to psychological warfare. That is when the true fear set in. Because NBA players can handle an athlete. You can handle a guy who jumps higher than you. What you can't handle is a guy who knows what you're going to do before you even think it. Someone who shrinks the floor, amplifies your mistakes, and makes losing feel inevitable. Bird was already doing that in 1980, and if you think this was just about checking box scores, you are not listening. This obsession bled off the page. It infected practices, it took over scouting reports, it dominated team meetings. Magic had to game plan his entire life around Larry Bird. Every crossover, every pass, every single matchup had Larry's shadow looming over it. By the time the Celtics were back contending for rings, Magic was living rent-free in a haunted house built by Larry Bird. But folks, we are just getting warmed up. What Bird did next on the hardwood, in the locker room, and inside the minds of his victims escalated to a level of savagery that not even Magic saw coming. If you thought 1979 and 80 were wild, you better buckle up, because what happened next is going to blow your mind. It wasn't long before the rest of the league started to realize that Larry Bird wasn't just good, he was a nightmare waiting to happen. Here's the thing. 90% of guys in the NBA use trash talk just to hype themselves up, right? It's just noise. It's screaming, "You can't guard me," just to convince themselves they belong on the floor. But with Bird, it was completely different. It was prophetic. It was a weather forecast for your destruction. He wouldn't just say he was going to beat you. He would tell you exactly how he was going to ruin your night, down to the specific square inch of hardwood he'd be standing on, and then he would just go do it. And that was the psychological trap. If a man hands you his entire game plan, gives you the blueprint to the crime, and you still can't stop it, you aren't just losing a basketball game. You're losing your dignity as a man, you're losing your status, but hang on, because it gets even weirder. The moment the whole world really saw this psychological torture chamber at work was the 1986 three-point contest. Now, you have to remember, this was the first year they ever did this event. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. You had the absolute sharpest shooters on the planet sweating bullets. Craig Hodges, Dale Ellis, guys who lived and died for the deep ball, sitting in that locker room, visualizing shots, trying to get their minds right. And then Bird just strolls in, doesn't even bother taking his warm-up jacket off. He looks around the room with total unadulterated disgust and drops the hammer. So which one of you guys is coming in second? Boom. He didn't just walk in, he kicked the door off the hinges and slapped everybody in the face. Some guys tried to chirp back, but Bird cut them down instantly. Nah, you ain't got it. You shot yourself out in warm-ups. He was literally dissecting Leon Wood before the contest even started. He looked him dead in the eye and said, "Nah, you shot yourself out, kid." Like, who is fighting for second place? Because first is taken. What makes this even funnier is that he wasn't saying it to be a comedian. He said it because, in his mind, the check had already cleared. The outcome was a done deal. And then he went out there and won the whole thing while still wearing his warm-up shirt like he was at a YMCA pickup run. When he let that final money ball fly, he didn't even watch it hit the net. He already had his finger in the air, walking toward the trophy before the ball even landed. That isn't confidence. That is an aura that borders on a god complex. But here is where the story takes a turn into the Twilight Zone. In 1985, the Celtics played the Atlanta Hawks. This is the legendary game where Bird dropped 60. But the box score lies, it wasn't just about the 60 points. It was the sadistic way he racked them up. He was calling his shots like he was playing a twisted game of Simon Says with professional athletes. At one point, he literally told the Hawks bench he was going to hit a shot and land right in the trainer's lap. Seconds later, he drains a massive fading three, gets fouled, and literally falls directly into the lap of the Atlanta trainer. You can't script this stuff. It was so ridiculous, so completely demoralizing, that the Hawks players on the bench lost their minds. These are the guys who are paid to hate him, paid to stop him, and they were literally falling over each other, high-fiving and jumping up and down in shock. Their own coach, Mike Fratello, actually had to fine his players the next day for cheering for the enemy. That is insanity. Imagine being so dominant that you turn your opponent's bench into your own personal hype squad. But if you think that's arrogant, just know that in 1986, right before a game against the Portland Trail Blazers, Bird decided he was bored. Literally bored with being the best right-handed player in the world. He walked into the locker room and told his teammates he was going to play the entire game with his left hand, just for the thrill of it. He went out there and dropped a 47-point triple-double, scoring 20 of those points with his left hand. Larry told us and the media straight up, tomorrow night's the last game of the trip. I got to save the right hand, so I'm going to play this one left-handed. It's the ultimate heat check. Bird with the left. And it stays. Pure skill, dripping with disrespect. When reporters asked him afterward why he would even do something so disrespectful, he just gave them a blank stare and said he was saving his right hand for the Lakers. Now, everyone loves to compare Bird and Michael Jordan, but their approaches were completely different species. Jordan was a physical predator, a shark in the water. MJ would jump over your head, run through your chest, and use his sheer athletic violence to beat you into submission. But Bird? He attacked your brain. He wanted to prove he was smarter than you. Take the Xavier McDaniel story, for example. Late in a tied game, Bird looks at Xavier, who is one of the toughest, meanest defenders in the league, and points to a specific spot on the floor. He says, I'm going to stand right here, and I'm going to hit it right in your face. No secrets, just a promise. Xavier plays the best defense of his life. He is draped all over him, but Bird gets to the spot, hits the fadeaway, and as he's running back on defense, he looks at him and says, damn, I didn't mean to leave 2 seconds on the clock. Xavier said later, 2 seconds on the clock. They called a timeout, and he turned around and looked at me and said, I'm going to score right here on you. And I said, I know you will. I'll be ready. But being ready wasn't enough against a ghost. But here's the shocking part nobody expected. Even the toughest, most violent team in history, the Detroit Bad Boys, started to crack under the pressure. We're talking about guys like Bill Laimbeer and Rick Mahorn, guys who would literally tackle you into the front row just to send a message, but they couldn't punch their way out of Bird's IQ. Isiah Thomas later admitted that Bird's mere presence caused pure, unadulterated panic in their hearts. And that panic, it led to the single most famous mistake in NBA history. It was Game 5 of the 1987 Eastern Conference Finals. 5 seconds left on the clock. The Pistons were up by 1, and they had the ball. At that point, the game was basically won. The series was over. All Isiah Thomas had to do was inbound the ball safely, and the Pistons would have gone up 3-2 in the series, likely ending the Celtics dynasty right there. But Bird had been haunting them all night, and Isiah was so terrified of Bird's anticipation that he short-circuited, rushed the pass, and threw a soft, lazy lob toward Bill Laimbeer. But Bird, he saw the future before it happened. He stepped into the lane like a ghost, snatched that pass out of thin air, and fed Dennis Johnson for the kill. But here is where the story gets ugly. After taking a beating on the court, Dennis Rodman and Isiah Thomas went straight to the mics and lit a match. They claimed if Bird was black, nobody would even know his name. It was the ultimate sour grapes, pure, unfiltered bitterness. But honestly, it forces you to address the elephant in the room. Their argument was simple. Strip away the Great White Hope narrative. And is he just another guy filling a roster spot? But you won't believe how Magic Johnson handled it years later when someone tried to corner him with that question. He didn't take the bait. He shook his head and said, that boy could flat out play, man. He shut that noise down immediately because Magic knew the truth. Bird wasn't just good for a white guy. That's an insult to the game. He was a tactical assassin who just happened to be pale. And even as the league got faster, younger, and more vertical, Bird's psychological stranglehold never loosened. Flashback to 1987. You've got a brash rookie named Reggie Miller trying to talk trash to Bird while he's standing at the charity stripe. Big mistake. Bird didn't even blink. He just paused, stared right through the kid's soul, and said, Rook, tell me you're joking. I am the greatest shooter God ever put on this earth. You understand? Then swish. Nothing but net. He walked off like he was just taking out the trash. But that was just the appetizer. Imagine the disrespect. He's basically saying, Reggie, are you out of your mind? You're trying to rattle the best shooter in history mid-game? You think you can freeze me while I'm talking to you? Next one. Bucket. Win. Then, fast forward to 1991, and you've got Shawn Kemp stepping up to the plate. Now, Kemp was a human highlight reel, a genetic freak who could jump out of the gym. Meanwhile, Bird is barely holding it together, playing with a back so broken he practically needed a wheelchair during timeouts. But Larry looked at the Rain Man and said, I'm the best player from Indiana, not you. Then he proceeded to dismantle Kemp's psyche like a biology frog. It was so brutal that Kemp still talks about it like war trauma today. He can still hear Bird's voice, hey, I'm the king of Indiana, son. Put a 3 right in your eye. And he did. It's cold-blooded, but it is the absolute truth. You look at that ruthlessness, and suddenly it makes sense why Michael Jordan called Bird the new sheriff the second he walked into the league. Real recognizes real. Jordan and Magic figured it out instantly. Larry wasn't just talented, he was built different. He didn't need a 40-inch vertical or lightning speed because his dominance was inevitable. It was Thanos-level stuff. Even Kobe Bryant treated Bird's game like a textbook. Kobe ranked him in his top 5 of all time. Not just for the jump shot, but for that specific killer instinct, that arrogance where I tell you exactly how I'm going to end you, and then I do it anyway. His list? Jordan, Magic, Bird, Hakeem, and the logo, Jerry West. That is elite company. And if you really analyze the Black Mamba, you see it. Kobe was the terrifying hybrid of Michael Jordan's athleticism and Larry Bird's basketball IQ. But there's a darker chapter to this legend. While Bird was out there humiliating superstars, his own body was secretly crumbling, betraying him in ways that would have retired a normal human being. He was playing on borrowed time, grinding through injuries that should have ended the show years before the curtain finally fell. And wait until you hear how a cheap $20 driveway project nearly cost him his entire livelihood. But before we get to the tragedy, you have to respect the violence. You can't understand the fear Bird caused until you look at what he survived. The 80s weren't basketball, it was a televised bar fight. We are talking 3 NBA championships, 12 All-Star selections, and a Rookie of the Year trophy he snatched right out of Magic Johnson's hands. He took a Celtics team that was a literal dumpster fire the year before and turned them into a dynasty, rattling off 3 straight MVPs in 1984, 85, and 86. Let me put that in perspective for you. In the entire history of this sport, only 2 other human beings have ever pulled off a hat trick like that. Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell. That is it. That is the entire list. He was the undisputed king of the hill during the most brutal, get-your-teeth-knocked-out era in NBA history. You have to understand the war zone he was stepping into. This wasn't the positionless, friendly, let's swap jerseys league we watch today. No, sir. This was the golden age of the enforcer. You had guys like Maurice Lucas, who looked like he'd rather break your ribs than give up a layup. You had the bad boy Pistons turning basketball into a literal blood sport. Yet, standing in the middle of these hyper-athletic, stone-cold killers was this tall, slow-looking white dude from a tiny town called French Lick. It looks like a joke, right? Like, how is this guy dominating when he runs like his sneakers are filled with wet sand? But don't ask me. Ask Michael Cooper. If you don't know Coop, he was the defensive hitman for the Showtime Lakers. Long, fast, and nasty. He made a Hall of Fame career out of putting the greatest scorers in a straitjacket. He was the one guy, Larry Bird admitted, was the toughest defender he ever faced. But ask Cooper today, he'll tell you he absolutely despised checking Larry. He's gone on record calling Bird a basketball savant. He basically said, I hate Larry Bird, but I respect the hell out of that man because we went to war in the finals over and over again. He talked about how the Lakers held emergency team meetings. You've got Magic, Kareem, Pat Riley, all just trying to solve the riddle of Larry Legend. And Cooper said the scariest part wasn't the jump shot, that was just the execution. The terror came from the fact that Bird was calculating every single possible outcome in real time, like a supercomputer in high tops. You could play perfect defense for 23 seconds, suffocating him. But in that final tick, he'd find a backdoor cut or a passing lane that physics says shouldn't even exist, But where does a basketball genius like that actually come from? You have to dig deep into that hard Indiana dirt to find the answer. Larry Bird didn't just grow up poor, he grew up with absolutely nothing. We're talking about a kid who wore the same beat-up clothes to school every single day while his family fought a war just to keep the lights flickering on. That's exactly why he played with a chip on his shoulder the size of a boulder. For Bird, this wasn't just a game to pass the time, it was his only escape route. So when he dragged Indiana State to that 1979 championship game, it wasn't just a fluke. It was the ultimate Cinderella story, rags to riches, played out on hardwood. He took a small-time school that nobody gave a damn about and willed them into the single most watched college basketball game in history. Just let that sink in for a second. 35 million people glued to their screens to watch a hick from a town of 2,000 people. That's the kind of grit that doesn't just get you noticed, it earns you the terrifying respect of your worst enemies. And speaking of enemies, remember Pat Riley? The slick-haired mastermind behind the Showtime Lakers? Well, Riley dropped a quote that still haunts the league. He said, "If I had to pick one guy to take a shot to win a game, sure, I'd choose Michael Jordan. But if I had to pick one guy to take a shot to save my time's life asterisk, I'm choosing Larry Bird every single time." Yeah, that was the level of fear the Birdman instilled in people. But it begs the question that drove everyone crazy, how? No, seriously, how does a slow, unathletic guy who looks like your plumber make the most elite athletes on the planet look like clueless rookies? Because on paper, Bird had no business beating these guys. But the second he stepped on that court, he didn't just beat them, he broke their spirits. See, Bird operated on a cold-blooded formula, starting with a little psychological warfare. Sports psychologists call the knockout effect. It's that moment Bird literally tells you exactly where he's going to stand and exactly how he's going to score on you. He's not just being a cocky jerk, he's planting a virus of hesitation deep in your brain. In the NBA, instinct is everything. But when Bird looks you in the eye and says, "I'm going to catch it right here and bury it in your face," he freezes you. He forces you to stop playing basketball and start playing a twisted mental game you have zero chance of winning. The moment you think, is he really going to do it? Boom. It's over. He's already torched you. But let's strip away the mind games and look at the mechanics. Bird mastered what I call the 3-inch rule. Most superstars need to blow right past you with speed to be effective. Not Bird. All he needed was 3 tiny inches of breathing room. He was the godfather of the step-back jumper decades before it became cool on Instagram. And the funny part? He stole the move from a bench warmer named Terry Durrod. But Bird took that basic move and turned it into a weapon of mass destruction. Since he knew he couldn't outrun you, he used surgical footwork to hijack your balance. A subtle shoulder shiver here, a head fake there, just enough to make you lean a 1/4 inch the wrong way. The instant your weight shifted to your heels, he stepped back, and the ball was already ripping through the net. He wasn't playing against your speed or your vertical, he was playing against your center of gravity. Then you have his bait and punish system. Most stars panic when they get double-teamed. They get frustrated and force bad shots. Bird, he invited the pressure. He'd literally post up in a vulnerable spot just to lure a second defender into his trap. But the millisecond that defender left his man, Bird's passing vision unlocked. He didn't just see the open man. He saw the soul of the defense crumbling. He had the entire court mapped out in his head like a high-tech GPS. But here's the ugly truth that really messed with the league's ego. It's one thing to get dismantled by a genius. It's another thing entirely to deal with the massive cultural baggage the media shoved down everyone's throat. They branded him the Great White Hope. That label was toxic. It suggested Bird was only a star because the league was desperate for a white face on the poster. And that created a level of resentment that was ready to explode. Put yourself in the shoes of a guy like Isiah Thomas or a young, hungry Dennis Rodman. You're out there bleeding for the game, and you see this slow guy who doesn't even look like an athlete getting all the glory, and the worst part, deep down, he's actually backing it up. So after the 1987 playoffs, Rodman finally snapped. He told the press Bird was wildly overrated and only winning MVPs because he was white. Even years later, he doubled down, claiming if Bird played in the modern era, he wouldn't survive. He literally said, "Larry Bird played in this era? I think he'd be in Europe." Pure disrespect. But the saddest tragedy of this entire saga, Bird's obsession with being the tough, self-reliant country boy is exactly what destroyed him. In 1985, instead of hiring a crew like a normal millionaire, Bird decided to personally shovel 13 tons of gravel to build a driveway for his mom. The guy was the MVP of the league, yet he's out there hunching over, destroying his spine for a $20 DIY project. His doctor, Dan Dyke, later said that was the beginning of the end. His back literally shifted out of alignment, and he was never the same. By the time the 1992 Dream Team rolled around, the legend was just a ghost of himself. While Jordan and Magic were flying high, Bird spent most of the Olympics lying flat on his back on the hard floor because the nerve pain was so agonizing he couldn't even sit in a chair. But as he stood on that podium in Barcelona, gold medal around his neck, he knew the ride was over. And the way he walked away, leaving the league in the hands of the one man who finally cracked his code, was the ultimate closing chapter to the wildest era in basketball history. Listen, you could snap his spine, hang his jersey in the rafters, and bury the man under the parquet floor, but Larry Legend, he was still haunting the NBA. It didn't matter if you were the new kid on the block or a 300-pound diesel engine like Shaquille O'Neal. You were going to learn the hard way that the hick from French Lick wasn't just a mythology. He was the architect of your nightmares. Let's talk about Shaq for a second. When the Big Diesel first crashed into the league, he looked at Bird and saw a slow, white guy. He actually thought Larry was nothing but a lucky shooter, some media darling pumped up by hype. He had no clue. Shaq literally admitted, "I hated Larry Bird growing up. I looked at his game and thought, there's no way. That's just luck. Pure, dumb luck." But then time ticks on, right? You grow up, you start seeing what it actually takes to survive in this Shark Tank, and suddenly, the blinders come off. Shaq realized, wait a minute, that's not luck. That's heart. That's grind. That man is an absolute assassin. Think about that. The most physically dominant force in human history, a guy who could shatter backboards just by looking at them, had to bow down and admit that Bird wasn't just good, he was a god among men. But here is where the story shifts gears. That fear, that hatred, it curdled into something else. A deep, blood-stained respect that birthed the greatest brotherhood sports has ever seen. You have to understand the context. For a solid decade, Magic Johnson and Larry Bird weren't just rivals. They wanted to rip each other's throats out. They were cold-blooded enemies on a warpath. Then comes 1991. The music stops. The world freezes. Magic drops the bombshell that he has. HIV. And the phone rings. And guess what? The first voice on the line wasn't a Laker. It was Larry. He calls up, and the hostility is gone. It's just quiet. He asks, "How are you holding up?" Simple. Human. Magic said, "I heard about it." And you could hear the crack in their voices. Two giants crying over a telephone line. Magic was choked up, barely able to speak, just because his sworn enemy cared enough to call. That single conversation shattered the ice. It changed the game forever. Suddenly, Showtime was dead. The Boston mystique was gone. They weren't superstars anymore. They were just two terrified men realizing they were the only two people on Earth who understood what it felt like to wear that crown. Magic confessed something heartbreaking later. He said when the rest of the world looked at him like a walking corpse, like he was already in the grave. Larry Bird was the only one who looked him in the eye and treated him like a living, breathing human being. But the ultimate mic drop? That came at the Garden during Bird's retirement ceremony. Magic steps up, unzips his Lakers warm-up to reveal a Celtics shirt sacrilege, right? Looks Larry dead in the face and drops the hammer. He says, "One lie. You only told me a single lie your entire career." That's pretty impressive. Just one. But you lied to the fans, and you lied to the whole world exactly one time. And you know what that lie was? You probably don't even remember, do you? Larry Bird said that there would be another Larry Bird one day. Well, let me tell you something, Larry. You were wrong. There will never, ever be another Larry Bird. I don't care how many players come through this league or how much talent they have. You can take this to the bank. There will never be another you.